Imagine how much effort it takes to be constantly monitoring your life to fit your expectations. Hey everyone, I'm Thais Sky. Welcome to Reclaim, a podcast for women by women on conversations that matter. Hello everybody. Thais Sky here. Welcome to Reclaim the podcast. I'm here for part 4 of the Reclaiming Worth series, and I'm in an Airbnb right now, so you may hear some background noise or echo, whatever it may be. You will probably hear it, and this is what it looks like to live a nomadic life. If you are not following me on social media, I announced or I shared last week that I'm currently going through a breakup of my partner of 5 years. And this past week was the week that I packed up all of my things and left the apartment. And I'm currently looking for places to live and figuring out what I want to do next in terms of my living situation. So temporarily, I'm living the nomadic life, and I'm seeing what that feels like and what that looks like. And it's just me and Chewy, my 10-pound terrier rescue, and taking life on. And I want to talk a little bit actually about this whole experience, and it aligns perfectly actually with what I wanted to share with you for part 4 of the series anyways, which is called Softening into Your Edges, and I want to talk about what that means. But something that I've noticed that comes up again and again with the work with my clients is this idea of softening and the desire that one has to soften. And I find that this idea, this word, often comes as a surprise, because most of us think that if we just keep pushing and bulldozing and forcing our way through life, like that's going to end up ultimately getting us what we want. And if we keep going into spirals of self-hate and really punishing ourselves for the bad behavior and bad intentions and bad fantasies that we have, and if we just really punish ourselves and really annihilate ourselves, then somehow or another we're gonna finally be forgiven. We're going to finally forgive our past sins, and we're going to be able to move forward in a really powerful way. But as you can imagine, that actually takes a tremendous amount of energy and effort to be constantly in a state of self-hate, in a state of feeling like you can't relax because you're constantly pushing out the world, right? And let's talk about what I mean by pushing out. I mean, anytime someone's behavior bothers you, you have to push them away with irritation, with opinions, with stories. You're pushing people away who aren't behaving the way you want them to. You're pushing away circumstances that are bothering you, that aren't perfect, that aren't the way you want it to. It's we're constantly, if you see me right now, I'm literally pushing my hands out. We're constantly doing that, protecting ourselves, because we are very, very, very fragile. And we need life to be at that perfect temperature in order for us to feel safe and secure. And so while the temperature of life is above or below what we're comfortable with, we are constantly having to push. Imagine how much energy you're exerting by doing that. Imagine how much effort it takes to be constantly monitoring your life to fit your expectations. So when, people come to work with me, what we inevitably find is that when we start to release the need to be so rigid, the need to be in so much control, and I'm talking about subtle work here, like subtle work. I'm not talking about setting up a step-by-step plan of how to release rigidity and control, right? No, I'm talking about when we start to unearth the deeper things that we've been covering up from ourselves for so long because we're terrified to look at those places. When we start to look and we start to be tender and fall in love with our tenderness, we soften. We soften our edges. The places within us that are so prickly and constantly being triggered and reactive, we soften those places. And that allows us to be more flexible, stronger, because we are softer. Just like if a really stiff tree can't survive strong winds without snapping, whereas like palm trees develop really supple bark, right? Really supple trunk that allows them to sway in the wind. That's what I'm talking about. A softening that is a strengthening that allows us to stand strong in the face of challenges while also not breaking. And I know we've all felt what it feels like to break, to feel like we can't go forward anymore, like we are just devastated. And in that breaking, we have a really sweet opportunity to grow from that break in a way that is conducive to cultivating resilience, right? We can choose to harden against life or soften against life. And at that break, that's the tipping point, because when we're broken, we can grow anew. And so we get to decide, are we going to harden or are we going to soften? And so I noticed in the breakup of my relationship and navigating moving out of the apartment and finding ways, to be supple in these circumstances, what I'm finding is that the training that I've been doing for the past 10 years of like really holding a strong container for all of my emotions, being able to name my experiences and to cultivate a support system around me of sisters who can truly hold me without needing them to save me. Oh, that's allowed me to really be soft during this transition. That's what allowed me to stay nimble and flexible. I remember so vividly when I lived in Jersey and I wanted desperately to move to New York City. Just the idea of moving, like just giving myself permission to really dream and be in fantasy about what it would look like to move to New York City would drive me to binge. Like, boom. Just the thought. If I looked up online for job opportunities, if I looked up online for, where to live, just not even because I was at a place where I could move, but just to let myself fantasize, visualize, even just that small act would drive me to a binge, because I was so rigid against myself. I was so scared. I was so terrified of this leap, terrified of this risk. I was so shut down that I could not be open to this unknown. Now, noticing myself going through this transition, just, 8 years from that place. No, less than that, like 6 years from that place. I can recognize in me that like, I've got this, that this transition is not going to break me. That there's a deep place within me that's rooted in flexibility. And I'm only able to get there because I held space for my trauma, because I dealt with it. And so softening into our edges is the invitation to start to really look at the uncomfortable truths within us and be tender to them. As we talked about in part 2 on what is the shadow and how we navigate our worthiness wound, we've got to start to look at it as how much is the fight costing us and what could it look like for us to be more soft. I also want to recognize too that if you're listening to this, odds are you've been doing your own self-development work, and odds are you are meeting really uncomfortable places. And I honor that. I really do. It takes a tremendous amount of courage to do the inner and outer work. And the fact that you're meeting your edges, you're willing to see that there are edges, and you're willing to get uncomfortable with those edges, it's just everything. It's everything, because that's where change can happen. And so we've got to like really, really, really be able to hold our hearts when we find those edges. For me right now, the big theme in my life has been being supported and allowing myself to be supported and being saved. Yeah. So I realized one of the big lessons that comes from this breakup with this relationship is for me to explore, where have I been with this person because I wanted this person to save me, versus being with this person or being in relationship with people who support me. And I think it's hard for us to want or it's hard for us to be supported at times, right? Because so much of us have attachment wounds where we have been so hurt by people in the past that all we want to do is push people away and not let people in. And so we have a fear of intimacy. And part of that is because we're terrified that we're going to need that person. And so the place within us that desperately needs other people is that place within us that wants to be saved. And we're so taught that that power lies in other people, that somebody else is going to save us, that we unconsciously seek partners that will fulfill that need, that will save us, that will swoop in and take care of us. I noticed this in my relationships, and I noticed this within my desire for my parents to be something that they're not. It's the underlying tension is, why can't they save me? Why can't they support me is the word that I use. But what I'm really saying is, why can't they save me? And so often we look into relationships not from a genuine place of independence and vitality and wanting to partner with that person in our lives, but really from a place of, will I be able to be saved? Will you save me? Because what we tend to do is we tend to attract partners, right? We tend to go for partners who are going to help us recreate the same family dynamic that we've had, a family of origin. That they're going to be able to meet us there. But this time, they're going to save us from that pain. That's what we're unconsciously seeking unless we're doing the work of actively breaking those patterns. And I noticed that in this relationship, that's what was really happening, is that there was this energy of me desperately wanting him to save me from myself, and me believing that if I can just stay in this partnership, then I will never have to feel that fear that I have of isolation and abandonment and aloneness. But that came at a really high cost. And these things usually do, these negotiations that we have with ourselves come at a really high cost. When we're negotiating for getting our needs met in other people as opposed to meeting our own needs, right? It always comes at the expense of something else. And it gets to the point where we've hit a limit, where we're no longer willing to annihilate ourselves. Or at least we can hope that we hit that limit, because if we don't, then we just stay in that partnership, or we just stay in that relationship, or we just stay in that situation, that life circumstance. So, one of the subtle works that I do is really examine what parts of us are addicted to these patterns. And how can we start to shift and break these patterns? Not from like a, let's just do it, let's just break it, let's just, never go back. But really looking at, how can we meet our own needs? How can we soften into the needs that we have that we're projecting into other people? And the tool that I use is called self-mothering, or learning how to mother ourselves again. Because so much of our attachment issues really stem from our initial relationship with our mom. And while our mother and father, or a caregiver, whoever that was for you, did their very best, often it was not enough for us as children. And so that resulted in us feeling like we were not adequately mothered. And this is a hard realization for many of us to admit. We would rather not see the imperfections within our parents. But once we kind of dig deeper, we can start to see where they didn't quite meet our needs. And again, it's not because that they're bad people. It's because they're also human. And so because there are places within us that didn't get the mothering that we needed, it's very easy for us to then seek that mothering out, right? Wanting to be saved. And the invitation, though, is, can we start to remother ourselves, learn how to meet our own needs, learn how to save ourselves. That way we can be strong people who lean on their support system, because that's critical, but without that unconscious pattern playing out of needing that people to be something that they're not. Such a big one. How often have we demanded that people be a certain way in order for us to feel loved and accepted and happy? How often have we demanded that life be a certain way in order for us to feel happy and fulfilled and safe, right? When we demand of other people, whether it's consciously or unconsciously, whether it's using that language or not, when we have this desire, like this tenacious desire that something be different, the invitation always is to look at the why, the what's here, what's underneath the surface. What's a need that's not being met? And then how can we start to tend to that need? How can we start to meet ourselves there? This is the key to beginning to unlock some of this deep wounds that tell us that we can't lean on other people, that we have to be perfect and rigid and in control all the time, right? So again, the answer always is, okay, there's something here. I have an unmet need. And then how can I start to tend to that need? How can I learn how to remother ourselves? The cool thing here is that when we start to mother ourselves again, we're basically saying that we don't have to let our parents, and specifically our mother's inability to nourish us, to keep us from nourishing ourselves. That's the greatest thing about this, is that we start to be able to meet our needs. We start to being able to be there for ourselves, as opposed to self-annihilating, as opposed to being so hard on ourselves. We get to meet the edges, meet the uncomfortable parts of us, and be able to hold it with such tenderness. What happens when we step into our inner motherhood is that we develop a connection with ourselves that serves as a link to our authentic life. We begin to feel worthy in our own love and in the love of others. We begin to stand as adults, whole, thriving, and full. And we are all deserving of that. Remothering ourselves is such a potent way that we can begin to say, I stand here and I'm allowed to stand here. So for me, in this breakup, there's so much uncertainty. There's so much I'm navigating, the loss of a relationship, the loss of a timeline of things that I wanted. I was excited to be entering my 30s, going into it, thinking that I was going to start to develop a family, a nest. And now there's so much that I am unclear about. And that could be so easily triggering and lead me into a spiral of brokenness. But because I've been able to really mother myself through this process and lean on myself, I've been able to find where I have been unconsciously attaching to my partner and needing him to save me, and then being able to meet that edge and soften. To me, this is a much more grounded approach than faking it till you make it. This is a much more grounded approach to confidence. This is a much more grounded approach to worthiness. When we begin with the self and really looking at ourselves and learning how to love and mother ourselves, the inevitability is navigating the difficulties of our lives with grace and maybe even with some ease. We hear this thing like, let things be easy, let things be easy. I don't know if it's necessarily about letting it be easy, but doing the hard stuff, looking at the hard places, so that then it just is easy. So the assignment that I'm leaving you all with today, as you're munching on this idea of mothering and softening, is to really look at where you have the hardest time, where you're really hard on yourself. Let's start there. Where are you really hard on yourself? What area of your life do you find yourself really struggling to be hard, to soften, right? To be easy, to let things go. Where is the tension? Let's name that. Name the location of the tension. And then let's get into inquiry, right? Let's get into that curiosity. And a great place to start is, what unmet need is here? What need is not being met that is requiring me then to be really hard on myself, right? Because I believe everything stems from a positive intention. Everything stems from a positive place. So there's a part of you that needs to be hard on yourself. So we got to get curious as to why. What's here? What need is not being met? And then how can you begin to meet that need? Usually the need is for attention, for love, for support, for forgiveness. It's usually a need to communicate, to express, to say something. Can you give yourself permission to meet your own need? And then just see what happens. Okay, just see what happens. And if this conversation is inspiring you and you're like, oh, this is starting to this makes sense and I'm really feeling this approach and I feel like I want more of this, well then I deeply invite you to consider joining me for Worthy Women Rise, my signature 4-month program. And doors were initially going to close this week, but because I've been in such a new space in the move, and I've been so focused on getting my stuff out of the apartment and finding a space to live, I decided to keep the doors open a little bit longer so I can really get the message of this program out into the world. And so you have a little bit more time to really figure out if this is the right thing for you. So if you're interested in learning more about Worthy Women Rise, go to worthywomenrise.com. You can learn everything there. And please, 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 really ask yourself where you are being invited to soften, because it's the hard places that need the greatest softening. I'm sending you all my love, and I will see you tomorrow, or I will come to you tomorrow for part 5 of the Reclaiming Worth series. Come catch up with me on Instagram at @IamThaisSky. Tell me how the series is landing with you. I love hearing from you, and I will talk to you all tomorrow.